Having seen Question Time and the many varied opinions, a question came up on the legitimacy of vigilantes. Now, with black street gangs and white street gangs and other ethnicities and Asian street gangs all taking part in the riot, it was not a racial issue, but an issue about crime and criminality and the looting of things, because these people have been brought up as consumers of high-end goods. They were wearing some of those high-end goods themselves, Nike trainers, Nike t-shirts and hoods and everything to conceal their identity. So these people were like consumer monsters. They wanted to get hold of those goods. One was even a student. He wanted to pay for his gap year through theft. So we're looking at the sort of selfishness that grew up during the Thatcher era, passed on through generation to generation, and now it's evident in the criminal gangs on our streets. But there is many different reasons why the riot happened. There may be socio-economic reasons, such as the financial crisis, because of course they had to rob things that they could not afford to buy. That was one point of view by a police officer. But are vigilante groups, or citizens militias as they would be called in the United States, and which are in a sort of grey area of legality in the United States, legal? Well, and should we reissue guns to citizens? Can the police actually deputise, or should they make laws to deputise people in such incidences where there is not an insurrection but an insurrection of looting in our society? That's something I would like you to respond to in the comment section, because bringing in the army, as I said in one of my videos, is fraught with danger, because UKIP, a Thatcherite organisation which is linked to the BNP and the EDL, wanted to bring in the army so that they could, if in effect through their extreme ultra-conservative allies in the Conservative Party, eventually take over the army. And this, as I said before, has happened before with Wellington's time in power, where the poor rates riots of the 18th century, the army was brought in, ultra-conservatives took over the government, and we had a dictatorship for the time that the Duke of Wellington was in. So bringing in the army is fraught with danger. Arming the population must be on the principle of equality of force. Why do we arm ourselves? Because there is an inequality of force being used. If you look at my videos on the gun crime issue, you can see that gangs will use force against individuals, street gangs that is. They don't typically slaughter the whole family. But if guns were issued, then we would still be back to square one. The Saudi and Bin Laden crime families, before the Arab Spring, were killing most of the people through knives, poison and fist fighting. They weren't using or AK-47s. There was an equality of force there, but the ruthlessness of their methods of threatening people's families to make them work for the Saudi and Bin Laden crime families, or killing people's families when people resisted, as they did in the Iraqi insurgency, led on to more heavier weapons being used, such as car bombs, anti-tank weapons, anti-aircraft weapons by criminal organisations such as the Bin Laden and Saudi crime family. If the citizens of Britain were armed, then evidently copying the Saudi and Bin Laden crime families, Thatcherites would arm themselves and use similar methods as the Saudi and Bin Laden crime families to get their aims, or gang members might use their firearms against the police. if the police had gone in heavy-handed during the riots, perhaps firearms would have been used by the people in those council estates. Right? I don't want to give that out as an idea to people, but it was already mentioned on Question Time by one of the people who worked at Kidscape, who was involved in trying to de-radicalise these gang members from the culture that the gun and crime culture that they've grown up in. So it's very difficult to have these kind of rearming the population. Although I was against the idea of guns being taken away from the population in the first place, because it reduces the population to an unequal position relative to the police, who do have access to firearms, you know. But if we go down to the route of having more and more authoritarianism, then we will be doing ourselves a disservice. We will come very close to having a dictatorship in this country because of the various different factions at work, who are all vying for power in this country. The best bet is to get the police to have much more aggressive training in it. The police should be on a basic level trained in boxing and jiu-jitsu, so that they can deal with rioters and have good riot training. Also, citizens' militias or vigilante groups, these could be hijacked by the BNP, EDL or rival other Thatcherite groups such as UKIP, or rival groups to them such as Marxist multiculturalists, who would divide the whole country along balkanised lines of ethnic hatred in their effort to reach the point of highest level of capitalism, in which they believe that after that point you can get to communism. So it's very difficult for us to have militia groups arising, especially if those militia groups decide to arm themselves with firearms. That would be a threat to the nation and the state, and so we must resist such urges. But if you're defending your house, if you're defending yourself, then you should also try and train yourself in boxing or jiu-jitsu, or have a baseball bat, which would be the quickest option, to protect your own home. And that is where you should stay. You should stay in your own home during a riot and wait for the emergency services and leave it to the authorities to intervene to save the situation. Although I would be in favour of the police being able to deputise people, as in the old Victorian or American posse system of, as you'd be familiar with in the Wild West, where a citizen militia could be brought together under the authority of the police and the riot police. That possibly could work, but for that, citizens would have to have citizen training in riot situations, as well as perhaps national service in the emergency services and the armed forces. I think that would be the best way forward to avoid such things as the disgrace that we saw our country fall into, where England's fabric of laws and society seemed to be threatened by what was a bunch of mindless thugs and kids, and organised by some very clever organised crime figures over Twitter and using encryption. So we have to divide the two groups between those who are using encryption, who are obviously organised crime people, and the opportunist looters who took advantage of the situation. But we should not see a former hyperpower of the British Empire and the great nation of England brought to its knees by a bunch of looters. Thank you for listening.